We're in Philippians 2. We're finishing up the second chapter of Philippians, and we'll probably head into chapter 3. Not a whole lot left. What are some things that we've talked about in Philippians so far, up to this point? It's a letter of encouragement. Yeah, letter of encouragement. What else? Who's he writing it to?
People in Philippi?
Yep.
Church.
Yeah, believers in Philippi. And so he's encouraging them, and he's encouraged by them. What are some of the things that he's encouraged by?
Their generosity.
Their generosity. Yeah, absolutely. Because they had sent the letter with a gift to him. And we don't know what the gift is, whether it was just, monetary contribution or if it was something else included in that, but a gift of sorts, and it was out of their generosity that they gave it. I think there's another letter that Paul wrote, and I don't remember which one it is now off the top of my head, but he mentions the Philippian believers and their gift, and that they had nothing. They were not well off, and yet they gave out of the generosity of their hearts and what little they had. And so that really speaks to their hearts. Yeah. Paul is in prison, and even though he's in prison, he is not put down by it. And in fact, he is rejoicing in it because God is still at work. And so he sees that, he recognizes that, and he asks the Philippians to rejoice with him, that God is still working despite the circumstances. And in chapter 2, we've been talking about unity within the believers. That unity is a super important part of the church. And he also has been talking about humility, what it looks like to have humble character in serving Christ. It's a very submissive, selfless character. And Paul even gives himself as an example. He says in verse 17, chapter 2:17, and he says, even if I am being poured out as a drink offering upon the sacrifice and service of your faith. Basically, he says, even if I die for you. And one day he will die for believers. He would be a martyr one day. But even in his imprisonment and his suffering, and eventually one day his death, he says it's all for the glory of God. It's all for the believers. It is for your benefit. Whatever God has in mind for all, he says it is for the benefit of the believers. And it's a very selfless and humble view of his own life. And so then going into verse 19, Paul gives us two more examples of what that looks like. Humble, selfless, Christ-like character. And so first we see Timothy, and then he gives us Epaphroditus. So let's just read 19 through 24. Let's do that. But I hope in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you shortly, so that I also may be encouraged when I learn of your condition. For I have no one else of kindred spirit who will genuinely be concerned for your welfare. For they all seek after their own interests, not those of Christ Jesus. But you know of his proven worth, that he served with me in the furtherance of the gospel, like a child serving his father. Therefore, I hope to send him immediately, as soon as I see how things go with me. And I trust in the Lord that I myself also will be coming shortly. Okay, so Paul, he's writing this letter. He really longs to see all of his friends in Philippi. And for the moment, he's in prison, and he can't physically be there with them. So the next best thing is that he wants a firsthand, honest account of how things are going in the church. And he can think of no one better than Timothy to send. And he could have sent the letter, he doesn't send the letter with Timothy. He sends it with Epaphroditus, and he says it's because he wants to see how things go for him. So apparently there's a reason why Paul is holding on to Timothy a little while longer, and so he sends the letter back with Epaphroditus. But then he says, be prepared because I'm sending Timothy to you. Be ready for his visit, and hopefully Paul will be coming shortly after. And so the church in Philippi was previously acquainted with Timothy. He wouldn't have been a new person to them. It was actually the perfect person to send them because, one, Timothy was trustworthy for Paul, and two, the church already was acquainted with him. Little background with Paul and Timothy. They met in Lystra. That is where Timothy was born and raised. He was raised by his mother Eunice and his grandmother Lois, and they were both Christian believers. But his father, however, was a non-believer Greek man. And so even though he has this mixed background, he's still raised in all the Jewish customs. He's raised to know and honor the Lord, which is a miracle in of itself, really, considering his mixed background. So Timothy begins traveling with Paul and Silas on their second missionary journey when they go to Philippi the first time. And so he quickly proves himself on the mission field, and he even goes so far as to allow himself to be circumcised because they were going to be encountering Jews, and he didn't want to be an offense to them. Because his father was Greek, he was never circumcised on the 8th day as a baby, like normal Jewish babies are. But as an adult, and he's decided he's going to go with Paul and Silas, he's going to serve, he's going to share the gospel, and he wants to make sure that there's nothing that stands in the way. He wants to make sure there's nothing that would give someone a reason to not listen to the truth that he brings to them. And so he allows himself to go under circumcision and to be able to present himself to people without any offense between them. And that's all chronicled in Acts 16, if you ever want to look at that. What's interesting is Paul's going to later talk about in chapter 3 about false circumcision and true circumcision. That's going to be fun. False circumcision and true circumcision. And he actually addresses that a little more in depth in his letter to the Galatians. So what happened is Timothy is a young man that traveled with Paul, and he did undergo circumcision, and that was approved. Titus, however, was also another man who traveled with Paul, and Paul said, no, you're already uncircumcised, don't go ahead and get circumcised. And so it's kind of, you're asking this question, why one and not the other? Well, it turns out at this time where Timothy is traveling with Paul, and that's a matter of an issue almost, there's these Jewish believers who are bringing up certain things like circumcision, and they're saying this needs to be done. Well, at the time, it was a preference, almost like believers shouldn't drink alcohol. It's a preference type of a thing. A lot of people stood by it. They thought it was important. If you were going to be a believer, that you should be circumcised, and there was a whole group that was like that. And at the time, it wasn't a huge issue. But by the time it got to where Titus was part of the group, and that was an issue then as well, it was more than preference. It was where the people were demanding it to be like a law. Preference became law. And kind of Paul was like, no, we're stopping here. This is no longer a thing that we do because we care about people who have preferences and things like that. He's saying it's at the point now where they don't believe the truth because of it. And so this needs to stop. And so he calls it out. Galatians 5, he talks about it a lot. Let me see if I can just find a few things here. But I note this because in the next chapter in Philippians, he brings up circumcision a lot, and it's a really big issue at that time, where physical circumcision was required. And Paul, it keeps pointing it out, that that's not the point. You're missing the point entirely. So let's see, Galatians 5. Really like the first 6 verses. It was for freedom that Christ set us free. Therefore, keep standing firm and do not be subject again to a yoke of slavery. Paul's saying, Christ set us free from all of these laws, and now our salvation is in him alone. Why are we yoking ourselves with all of these requirements, with these burdens, yet again, when they're not necessary? And he says, behold, I, Paul, say to you that if you receive circumcision, Christ will be of no benefit to you. And I testify again to every man who receives circumcision that he is under obligation to keep the whole law. You have been severed from Christ. You who are seeking to be justified by law, you have fallen from grace. For we through the Spirit, by faith, are waiting for the hope of righteousness. For in Christ Jesus, neither circumcision nor uncircumcision means anything, but faith working through love. So he's saying, if you're going to place your trust and your confidence and your hope and a bodily act of circumcision, then you might as well just be keeping the rest of the law. And we saw how that goes. Doesn't go well. So he's saying, if that's where your hope is at, then Christ means nothing to you. Christ gives you no benefit, no gain, because your hope isn't in him. It's still in the law. So he's calling it out here in Galatians. Galatians is kind of a funny letter to read, because you can tell he's fed up. He's so fed up. But anyways, so keep that in mind as we go into chapter 3, when we're talking about circumcision a lot. So
I have a question.
Yeah.
So maybe I missed this. So Timothy's father was Greek.
Mm-hmm.
Were the mom and grandma Jewish?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Which
So
is
that's
fine.
where he got a lot of his Jewish
Okay.
upbringing. He
But
still
they
is.
decided not to.
I don't really know how that
Circumcise?
worked. Apparently the father had say in that he
Okay.
wouldn't be circumcised.
Okay.
Because normally a Jewish baby would be
Yeah.
circumcised on the 8th day. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So, let's see. Paul gives us a glowing recommendation of Timothy, and you can really see the special relationship that these two have. And so the first thing that he says in verse 20, I have no one else of kindred spirit who will genuinely be concerned for your welfare. So this is a kindred spirit. He's very like-minded to Paul, and not just to Paul, but also to the shared message of Jesus. They really are bonded over that in particular. This is so much deeper than the whole, well, we get along, or we have the same interests, or we work well together. This is so much deeper than that. They have this deep connection. It's founded on the shared grace that they both received and that they want to share with the world around them. And so the relationship of Paul and Timothy, it grew to the extent where Paul actually refers to him as my son in the faith, and that's in his letters to Timothy himself. And so you really see this strong relationship, so as to the point where Paul almost becomes like a father figure to Timothy, and Timothy like the son that Paul never had. And so that's a really cool thing to see. Paul says that Timothy is concerned for the interests of others, and he's seeking the interests of Christ. And I don't know if you remember in chapter 1, Paul, he's saying, I'm in prison, and there are some people here in Rome who are preaching out of selfish ambition And basically they're like, hey, Paul's out of the way, time for me to step into the spotlight and get a following, and they've got these selfish motives for their preaching. But then Paul also says, but then some are preaching out of love and genuine goodwill, and Timothy is definitely one of that group. He was, as Paul talked about in chapter 2, verses 3 to 4, where it says, regarding others as more important than yourself. That is truly what Timothy embodied. And Paul saw it and encouraged him. Notice the shift. Let's see, verse 20, where it says, concerned for your welfare. And then in 21, where it says, seeking after the interests of Christ. It says the rest of them are seeking after their own interests, not the interests of Christ. And so basically you take from that Timothy is seeking after the welfare of the church, and he is seeking after the interests of Christ. What are the things that Christ is concerned with? Because that is what is our service is founded on. Our service as people of ministry, like Paul, like Timothy, serving others comes from a service to Christ. And when we truly love Christ, and that's going to spill out. That love is going to spill out naturally to the people all around us. And that's exactly what we see in Timothy's life. And then the last thing, in verse 22, is we see he has proven character. And there's that approved character. We've talked about that before. Romans 5 talks about, if you've got, I'm going to get it all messed up. Something about if there's trials, then you have endurance, and endurance, then you have perseverance, and if you have perseverance, then you have approved character. It's something like that. I'm getting the order all out of whack, I know. But anyways, so that's that same word that's used there, that proven character or a proven worth. And so, but Paul is highlighting all of the genuine, selfless, humble characteristics about Timothy, and as he's doing that, he's basically putting a spotlight on Timothy and telling the church, listen to him. He's worth listening to. I know that I can't be there, but Timothy is worth listening to. I can send him to you, and I know that he will have good leadership for your church, that he will serve you well, he's going to love you well. And so he's really saying, listen to him. There's no one I trust more. So what are you guys' thoughts on Timothy and Paul's relationship that we see in these few verses?
They're very close,
They're very close.
and they love each other. And I think they probably have the same, commitment to Christ, to serve him.
Yeah, I agree.
And they encourage each other and help each other in that endeavor.
You ever have, or either have yourself or have heard of in other people, where two people just are terrible for each other? They bring out the worst in each other, and you can just, that is, you are not a good person around that person, or, something like that. And I think it's the opposite for Paul and Timothy. It's like they bring out the best in each other, and they drive each other towards being more like Christ. Yeah, that's kind of what I get from their relationship.
It's a good person to have imprisoned with you.
Yeah, no kidding.
I'm sure helped encourage him and keep others encouraged as well.
Yeah. I don't think Timothy is actually in
Well, I mean,
prison,
like,
but he is there with him.
Supporting him.
Yes,
Yes.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. What a person to have by your side
Yes.
as you are undergoing those circumstances.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Well, they can trust each other implicitly,
Mm.
and they know what the other would say, and they probably know what the other one would say in the same situation. They could probably finish each other's sentences.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kindred spirits always makes me picture Anne of Green Gables.
Yes.
Talking about her kindred spirits. So that's a good picture to me
That is a good picture, yeah. Yeah, you're right.
of how close, how tied.
Mm. And how
They're
precious
inner.
that is. Yeah. Yeah, that's a treasure to have that. Yeah. I also see an example for mentorship in the church. Paul took Timothy under his wing and he taught him, and Timothy got all sorts of firsthand experience alongside Paul. I can only imagine the things that he witnessed, the things that he heard, just the amount of growth that happened in that young man's life because of having someone like Paul to guide and to correct, especially for someone like Timothy who didn't have a father figure. We don't know exactly what happened with his father, but it says that he was raised by his mom and his grandma. And so it doesn't seem like his father relationship was very strong anyway, especially being a believer and his father's a non-believer. There's a lot of disconnect there.
So his father was Greek,
Mm-hmm.
which means he was Gentile. So is Timothy Gentile?
Is that technically Gentile, or is that Samaritan?
I don't know.
Or
His mother was
not,
Jewish.
no, oh wait, proselyte. Is that proselyte? There's all the terms that I get mixed up for what's what. Is that right? I don't know. There is a term for that.
Yeah, that's not the term.
Oh, it's not?
Proselyte,
Yeah?
you proselytize when you're trying
That's
to.
a negative word, right?
I don't know now.
Just say it, what does it mean?
Like someone comes to your door and says,
Well,
hi, we're with whoever, whatever religion, and we think you ought to be too.
oh, that's the term for a convert. A Gentile who converts to
I thought it was
Judaism.
something way more negative. The way, like your facial expression, I was like, what is it?
Well,
You're like, no.
it's often put in a negative way.
Okay.
Oh, you're proselytizing. People from that church are going to that church to try and.
Steal you away, or,
Yeah.
yeah, okay.
So he's not full Jewish, yeah, he did,
Okay. Google's not giving me anything that's very helpful. So,
But doesn't it come through the mother? To be
yes,
Jewish?
it does. So he is considered to be of Jewish descent, even with his mixed background. But I was thinking that there was a term for
So that,
Have these-
that is a mixed background
it. Is technically yes.
for a Jewish woman to marry a Greek, not
Right.
another Hebrew.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
I didn't know that about him.
yeah. I'm not sure what would lead up to that. For a Jewish woman to.
Yeah, if you're a believer, would you marry? Like,
Well, I don't know if she was a believer when she married him.
But isn't her, okay, I get confused on this with the Jewish, because I know it's a religion, but it's also
It's a people.
Yeah,
race.
thank you, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So,
They weren't supposed to marry
okay.
other nationalities or.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Like, it's surprising that she did that then, if
Right.
she was technically considered,
Right,
to be actively in her faith.
right.
But
Believer or non-believer, like Christian or non-Christian, at that point, she was still a Jew, and Jews were supposed to marry other Jews, right? So I don't know what brought it about to that point, where she was marrying a Greek man. And I don't know when she became a believer, but definitely by the point that she was raising Timothy, because he was raised.
but the
And
mother
it-
was a believer, so her mother was.
Her mother was, yeah. But who knows when
Yeah.
that happened either,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would that have caused some Jews to not listen to him because he had,
Yes.
I know he got circumcised to relate, and his mother was Jewish.
I think the Jewish descent on his mother's side, combined with his circumcision that he eventually got, was enough in the eyes of the Jews to make him worthwhile listening to. Otherwise, he's not even worth listening to. I don't even think that he would be allowed to preach in synagogues because of that. Yeah. So he was definitely at disadvantage. And so I think that's why he went the extra mile to provide every opportunity that he could possibly have. Yeah.
How good if he didn't grow up with a father and Paul didn't have a son. What a nice, natural.
What a match.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right.
God to
Yeah, you're
give them each what they didn't have.
Yeah. Probably Paul wasn't going to Philippi thinking, I'm going to find a son, like, or Lystra. I guess they met in Lystra. But what a cool thing. God brought him his way, and it was something beautiful came from that. Yeah. Yeah, that's really cool.
That in itself seems like it would deepen the relationship.
Yes,
That each of them
I agree.
had something that, I don't know if you'd call it missing in their life, but something that they hadn't had before, that they now had.
Right. Yeah. And I think that you would have a better understanding, or no, that's not the right word for it. It would deepen your understanding of your relationship with God when you have a father figure, when you have children, or someone who is like a child to you. All of a sudden, you're seeing more things about God and his character and how he sees us that maybe you wouldn't notice as well before.
I completely agree, because a lot of times I'll be like, it's not the same relationship, but I think of like the discipline and things like that, like that relationship between myself and my children. Like I think about that, you can really relate that to your relationship with God a lot of the time. So yeah, that would give you a new perspective, a deeper perspective on that.
Yeah. As a young person, maybe not quite yet a parent, and you think of discipline, depending on how your parents disciplined you could really shape your view of God and his discipline on us, his children. And then you become a parent yourself, and the way that you discipline your children is going to, shape that some more. It just continues to kind of fill it out a little bit. Yeah, that's cool. Okay, so then Epaphroditus is the next person that Paul talks about and gives us as an example. And we can read 25 to 30, the end of the chapter. But I thought it necessary to send to you Epaphroditus, my brother and fellow worker and fellow soldier, who is also your messenger and minister to my need, because he was longing for you all and was distressed because you had heard that he was sick. For indeed he was sick to the point of death. But God had mercy on him, and not on him only, but also on me, so that I would not have sorrow upon sorrow. Therefore I have sent him all the more eagerly, so that when you see him again you may rejoice, and I may be less concerned about you. Receive him then in the Lord with all joy, and hold men like him in high regard, because he came close to death for the work of Christ, risking his life to complete what was deficient in your service to me. All right, what are some of the first thoughts that you have after reading that? That glowing report from Paul in verse 25. Could you imagine being Epaphroditus and handing a letter to the church, and it's like written like, Epaphroditus is amazing, like, and they're like, did you put this in there? Like, but look at that. I mean, he didn't just say Epaphroditus, my brother. He said, my brother, my fellow worker, my fellow soldier, your messenger and minister to my need. I mean, that is a lot.
Covers about everything.
It does. It does. It really tells us about Epaphroditus, whereas normally we don't have any information on this man. But we do know that he was a faithful servant of Christ. I think that it shows whether the Philippian church chose him as their representative and messenger, or whether he volunteered for it. Either way, I think that that shows that he was a man of great character, that he was a man worthy of being picked, or maybe a man worthy of volunteering. Either way, it says a lot about him.
Is this the only book that Paul talks about Epaphroditus that he wrote?
As far as I know, yes. Yep. We know that Epaphroditus got sick. Now, I don't know if he got sick on the way, if he got sick once he was there. We don't really know a whole lot about his illness and the details, but we do know that it was very severe to the point where he almost died. And that says something right there, that, I mean, the man traveled so far to go to bless Paul, to minister to his need, to bring a letter from the church. I mean, I think I looked it up, it was almost 800 miles that he traveled by foot and by sea. Yeah. That's a long way.
How long would that take, do you think?
I don't know. I don't know what travel time was like back then. I can't imagine it was short, though. Yeah. Yeah, he really traveled a long ways. And then to get sick and to be on the brink of death, and you're in a foreign city, you're away from all of your family, your friends, who knows what kind of family he left behind to go make this trip. And yeah, he was suffering because maybe not because, but he was serving Christ, and he was following faithfully, and he was on the brink of death. But then Paul says that God had mercy on him, and not only on Epaphroditus, but also on Paul, because Paul would have just been overcome with grief if he had lost Epaphroditus. And so clearly Epaphroditus is dear to Paul. I mean, I don't think Paul would be like, I don't think he would be like that for anybody, even if it was somebody he didn't know very well. But I think that this is a very dear person to Paul, and I think Paul thinks the world of him. And so Epaphroditus is being sent back to the church, not because he did a bad job, but because the church is so concerned for Epaphroditus. I mean, I feel like our church would do the same thing if one of our members went on this trip overseas, and then we hear that they're deathly ill, and we're praying night and day that they are recovered and healed, and then God does. That's amazing thing. But what joy our church would have at the actual return of that person. That person would come back and give us an account of God's hand and their time there with Paul. I mean, that would just be, what a blessing that would be to the church. And so Paul knows that. Epaphroditus was sent to be a blessing to Paul, but Paul says it's much more necessary that he is returned to you, and that he is, that you're able to rejoice with all of us. Yeah.
I was thinking when I read that it also showed how much Paul loved the Philippians.
Yeah. Yes.
That he returned him.
Yeah.
Or sent him back.
Yeah.
Because he probably needed him.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, which is why he was there. But so again, Paul sacrificed himself for his needs because he loved those people so much.
Yes, I completely agree with you. I don't think that this was a, hey, I'm just here to drop off some money and then I'm gonna scooch, I don't think that's what this was. I mean, you travel 800 miles, you're gonna stay for a while, and you're gonna visit, and you're gonna spend time with Paul. You're so happy to be with Paul and to minister to him. Who knows what else kind of things he was doing to care for Paul at that time. So I think you're right, Marilee. For Paul to send him back shows that Paul cared more about the Philippian church than his own needs. He could have been feeling sad for himself and being like, man, I was really looking forward to another friend here, and now he's got to go back. But that's not how he's seeing it at all. He's seeing it as another reason to rejoice. And another example for us.
Mine says, 28 says, "For this reason I'm very eager to send him back, so that you may rejoice again when you see him, and I may be less anxious." So it did make him less anxious to send him back, because he was anxious that they were
So
missing
upset.
him. They were upset.
Yeah.
They were worried about him.
They were, distressed at his, I like that, that's good. And then 29 to 30 really kind of sums up our man Epaphroditus. I wonder what his nickname was. I really wish he had a nickname. It's a line. Fro, yeah, Fro, you're so right. Epafro. Paul says, hold men like him in high regard. I think that really shows Epaphroditus' commitment to the Lord, to his mission and ministering to Paul. And Paul is basically saying, this is an example of a godly servant of Christ. This is what it looks like. And so if you see people who are like Epaphroditus, then they're a good one. Okay, let's sum up chapter 2 real quick before we go into chapter 3. Remember all of the themes of joy that we were talking about? What was the first chapter? It was joy in the midst of circumstances. That's right. And then this one, chapter 2, is joy in the midst of, or despite, people. And so I think the key verse for this chapter is, in my opinion, verse 3. Do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit, but with humility of mind, regard one another as more important than yourselves. I think that is the key for this entire chapter. It's the key to having joy, despite people who would like to steal that joy. We see the examples that Paul has given us in himself, but then also in people like Timothy and Epaphroditus. So we have examples for that.
I looked up proselyte. A person who has converted from one opinion, religion, or party to another.
Okay, yeah. So that would be
Convert,
convert. You're right. That is the term for if a Gentile converts to Judaism. So a Gentile could convert to Judaism, and they would be a proselyte. That I was getting it mixed up with Hazzies.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you're right. It is. That's exactly
Well, I
what it
wasn't
is.
right. I wasn't picturing it being converted, but.
Well, you were using the term, how it would be used for any other way.
To proselytize.
Right, exactly, yeah. But then
Another term
proselyte
for
is
proselytize.
Yeah, I'm not sure if, now that I think about it, I'm not sure if there is a term for someone who is mixed Jew and Gentile. I'm not sure what that is. I'll have to ask Derek and see if he knows. No, I don't know. Any other thoughts on chapter 3? Or 2? 2? I'm going into 3. That's why it's in my Okay. Chapter 3. So like I said, chapter 1, Paul talks about having joy in the midst of circumstances. Chapter 2, he talks about having joy even despite people who would like to steal that joy. And chapter 3 is joy in the midst of things. Things, either a lack of things or an overabundance of things, or things that get in the way of us. We'll see that as we go along. But what do you guys think of when you think of like the things that Paul is talking about? What are some things that would steal our joy, that would get in the way?
Money in general.
Yeah, money in general, for sure. What else?
Is this where we hear from him that he's had much and he's had little and he's happy either way?
No.
Okay.
I'll figure out where that's at, but I can't remember. But another
That's chapter,
point that,
oh, that's chapter 4.
oh, that's chapter 4, okay.
That's what Tracy said.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, okay, yeah, that is chapter 4. What else? What are there some things that, that would get in the way of our joy?
Possessions.
Possessions.
Stuff.
Mhm. I think the term here can be a little more encompassing than strictly material goods, though material goods for sure definitely play their part in that. But I think that we can broaden that a bit more to achievements, awards, titles, careers, ethnicity, heritage, kind of like the Jews. What else? Gifts and talents, even. They
All
can
those things are about me.
Yes, or we make it about us. They are gifts given by God, but we make it about us, don't we? And so I think, things you're born with, things you earn, stuff you have, it's a very all-encompassing term that we make about us, like you said. And Paul sometimes refers to these things, not all the time, but sometimes refers to them as flesh. That might surprise you, but I think about works of the flesh, boom, a lot of things fit into that category right there. So keep that in mind as we go along. Okay, let's just do verses 1 and 2 real quick. Finally, my brethren, rejoice in the Lord. To write the same things again is no trouble to me, and it is a safeguard for you. Beware of the dogs, beware of the evil workers, beware of the false circumcision. Okay, so remember, Paul has just been talking about unity, been talking about humility. He gave us examples of what that looks like. And then he's reminding them to rejoice again. And it's fun because he just keeps saying over and over to rejoice in so many things. And he just reminds them. And then he says, I'm happy to write the same things again. I'm happy to remind you to rejoice. I'm happy to teach things, even if maybe he taught some of these things previously to the Philippians while he was with them in person. And he's saying, I don't care if I'm saying the same things again because it is a safeguard for you. Meaning, it's always to your benefit to be reminded of core doctrines, of key aspects of our faith, of things that we forget so easily, like rejoicing. We forget that so easily. And so Paul is reminding them, and he is more than happy to remind them as many times as it takes. And if you read the letters of Paul kind of together, you'll see he says a lot of the same things over and over because they are so important and because of the things that most churches just need to hear. And so yeah, then he says in verse 2, beware. He's got 3 bewares. And so what Paul is doing here, he says he is writing the same things again. He's reminding them to rejoice. He says it's a safeguard for them. And then he lists 3 things or 3 people, whatever it is, that he wants to safeguard them from. So the protection of the church is super important to him. What do you think that he is trying to protect them from? He's reminding them to rejoice. He's reminding them of key teachings. He just went over unity and humility.
And false prophets.
Yes, bingo. False teachers. That's exactly what Paul wants to protect the church from legalism, from false gospels, from false teachers. I mean, he's talked about, like I said, unity a number of times now. And if unity is central to a church, unity centered on Christ is so important in a church, then the number one threat to that would be false teachers that are sowing seeds of discord, of disunity. They are trying to take the unity off of Christ, that's centered off of Christ. They're trying to take it off of Christ. And now all of a sudden, you need to be about following these laws that I have set up that you need to follow. I mean, we see that time and time again in so many churches, and it was the same then as well. Paul was dealing with the same thing. And so Paul brings up this warning in verse 2, and he's warning against Judaizers. Judaizers were a group that were Jewish believers. They were Jewish Christians, but they claimed that Gentiles must first convert and be circumcised in order to be Christians. So they're basically saying, yeah, Jesus is the Messiah. We believe that. But he's our Messiah, and if you want to share our Messiah, then you need to be a Jew to share the Jewish Messiah. So you need to convert, you need to be circumcised, and a lot of the times they were also calling for observance of the rest of the Mosaic law. So basically it was being a proselyte, converting to Judaism, and observing all the law of Moses, and then tacking Jesus on a little bit, kind of, sort of. So that was what the Judaizers were doing, and they were causing a lot of issues. And so Paul addresses the Judaizers 3 times, 3 different names, each time saying beware. So the first one we see is beware of the dogs. Oh shoot, it's 7:30, you guys. I didn't realize the time it was. Dang it. I was like gearing up and ready to go. Oh man, dang it. Okay, well, you guys will find out about the dogs next time. Okay. Any thoughts before we end?
Whiplash.
What? Yeah. I thought
Did
it still had
something
like 10
happen
minutes.
Are we supposed to see a sunset?
I wish it was that. Okay, so come back ready to learn about the dogs next time.
It was just getting interested.
I know. I was excited too, Vicki. All right, Marilyn, would you mind praying?
Sure.
Thank you.
Father, again, thank you for this time in your word, and help us to be able to retain it and apply it in our lives in some way. We thank you for your word and what the Apostle Paul taught so many people and how it affects our lives yet today. Be with each of us as we go home tonight. Pray that everyone gets there safely. We continue to pray for Luella and Leo, that you would just undertake for all their needs. We ask this in Christ's name. Amen.
Thank you.
Does anybody, do you know